Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another exciting conversation brought to you by 4E Sydney Digital Conference. Before we begin, an acknowledgement to country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today, the Dharawal people, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to our audience tuning in via live stream on Facebook Live this evening. I hope you stay with us for the next hour as we discuss and explore this very engaging topic centred around the power of hip-hop in engaging youth in education, career pathways and global communities. This is a great conversation presented in partnership with the Community Music Conference and International Society for Music Education, as well as a very special thank you to 4E Sydney, Viva Entertainment, the Riverside Theatre, Create New South Wales, Australia Council for the Arts for putting this discussion on and housing the incredible conversation sure to flow with our really esteemed panellists. Now, before I introduce everybody briefly, for those of you tuning in tonight and of course this morning in the US for our US audience, power of hip-hop in engaging youth in education, career pathways and global communities. This discussion explores ideas around the power of hip-hop, examining projects that are taking place around the world where hip-hop is used as a tool for education, health and engagement amongst youth and community. It will look into how hip-hop culture is creating a home away from home, and forging lifetime relationships and support networks for the youth across the globe. Now, the presenters that we have to discuss tonight will reflect on their experiences and work related to equity, inclusion, and how music education has been utilised in underprivileged, underserviced, and neglected communities and regions. Coast to coast, together we follow hip-hop from the originating boroughs of New York City all the way down to Australia. Now, without further ado, because this is such a wonderful, engaging conversation and topic, let me welcome our esteemed panellists to everybody watching tonight. So we'll start with our guests here in the studio and just do a quick little introduction of everybody. It can't be quick. These are very esteemed people. We'll start with the beautiful Zia Dalla. Zia Dalla is a mixed-race Southwest Sydney-based poet, musician and actor who avidly addresses themes of social inequality, politics and self-reflection in her works. We've also then got next to me Dr. James Humberstone. Dr. James Humberstone's output is influenced by his research background in experimental music and his interest in composing for children and community ensembles. He has had many residencies and a prolific decade of creative works. He also completed his PhD and was appointed lecturer in music education at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. That is a conversation in itself, sir. Then we've got next to me here the brilliant Dobby. He's a rapper, drummer and music composer. Proudly identifies as a Filipino and Aboriginal musician whose family is from Brawarina on Ningemba land. I hope I've said that correctly. He's performed at many events including Big Sound, Sydney Opera House and Boomerang Blues Fest. Going to our amazing guests tuning in from the US. From New York City, we've got James Sassoon Gant. James is a hip-hop artist, producer, scholar and educator, and his 2015 undergraduate thesis, The Informal Education of a Black Working Class Male in New York City, challenges the shortcomings of the American education system while uplifting the benefits of art as necessary education. Boom, mic drop on that one. And across to Dr. A.D. Carson. He's an award-winning performance artist and educator from Decatur, Illinois. His work focuses on race, literature, history, rhetorics, and performance. He received a PhD in rhetorics, communication, and information design at Clemson University. He also, submitted in rap album form as a primary feature of a digital archive, his doctoral dissertation. Need I go on? An hour that we have these incredible people. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this amazing forum, everybody. Please let me hear your voices and not just mine. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. very early morning for you guys in the US. So thank you for tuning in to us here. It is evening here in Sydney, and we're going to get straight on into this. My name is Maxine Johns, aka Miss Hennessy. I am a published author, radio DJ, hip hop DJ, and writer and just lover of hip hop. So I certainly hope we all have a great conversation tonight. Kicking off with my first question. The power of hip-hop is such a limitless statement, right? We cannot assign how powerful hip-hop is. There is so much power in this genre that its potential hasn't even reached its pinnacle yet. But yet when we look at what and how it has affected each and every one of us tonight, you really can feel its greatness. If I can ask the question to each of you as to what you think hip-hop's greatest teaching tool has been when it has come to creating the pathways of your own journey. If I can start with you, AD, given your really solid role within hip-hop education, what do you think your hip-hop's greatest teaching tool has been for your journey?
I think that the greatest teaching tool that hip-hop has provided for me is maybe the idea that I could own and participate actively in my education and development as a scholar and as a person coming into a kind of a role as a political being in the world as I am experiencing it.
Right. Right, I like that. What about your thoughts on that, James? What's its greatest tool been for you as an educator?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, plain and simple, it helped me get an advanced degree, a bachelor's degree, which, there was a few years in my life where I wasn't sure if that'd be possible.
Right.
And I would say additionally to that, being able to take my experiences as an artist and as a man, as a Black man, and be able to pass them on to young people in a mentorship and teaching capacity of something that wasn't a trajectory I imagined for myself the very first time I picked up a pen to write a rap in like 1997 when I was in my teens. So I'd say those would be the two best answers.
Absolutely. Awesome. What about you, Dobby, coming back to here? What would you say?
Yeah, I think hip-hop has been a really powerful teaching tool in order to reconnect with my identity. I've been using it a lot, throughout my career to not just express my identity and cultural heritage as a Filipino and Moriwari person, but also to use it to reconnect to it. I've used it in a way that helps me. Just like Arnie Lynn and Arnie Nolene was saying in the previous panel about hip-hop being the new songlines,
right.
It has been a chance for me to be able to say, let's find these words in our language and reconnect to specific stories of our rivers and our waterways, and then use that and present that within the form of hip-hop. So it's kind of solidified in my brain as like, it functions as as an educational tool to teach my own identity to myself and also people who listen to it.
Yeah, I like that. What about you, James? What are your thoughts?
So I would say, as somebody with a background as a classically trained composer who's come through the academy, that hip-hop has been a great way to challenge myself to be as open-minded as I think I am. I've felt strongly for a long time that that music education isn't inclusive enough. And it's not culturally relevant enough for the young people who we teach. And I say that all the time to my students, but I wanted to challenge myself to work with artists of the world's most popular musical genre to create art, this art myself, and to actually become a student myself, to challenge myself to think critically about what music is, who music is for, what music education is about and for. And that's what hip-hop's done for me.
Brilliant. Yeah, awesome. Z, what about you? Because you're obviously somebody who is very much entrenched in working with youth, and of course your own background. So how do you feel that hip hop has been in an educational tool way for you?
Yeah, I think for myself, it's definitely helped me to reconcile with my sense of identity and also to connect with my heritage and history of storytelling. and great poets from my father's land in Iraq. And one of the things that has been so powerful is, I guess, it's power to empower. So working with like a lot of my students, I find that hip hop is such a great tool to, I guess, like upskill and really empower people.
Absolutely. So I would say that empowerment is definitely the biggest, or one of the biggest lessons that we can take and continue sort of paying forward with hip hop within the educational realm. A career in hip-hop has become so much more achievable now more than ever, given the abundant resources that are available. So much more than when I first started my journey, 20 years ago. It was, and especially here in Australia, it wasn't as big a genre and as much of a respected genre as it is today. So looking at where it has come from to where it is today on a global scale, from a cultural standpoint, what would you all say has been, some of the biggest challenges in its acceptance that we've had to overcome? Dobby, obviously starting with yourself. You've, had quite a successful career, merging your love of hip hop, obviously, with all of your, other attributes as a musician and as a man of obviously Indigenous background and your Filipino background as well. So, what would you say, as a lover of hip hop, have you found to be some of the greatest obstacles to overcome with that?
In terms of acceptance of hip hop and its power is when you say that, it reminds me of in its early stages when hip hop came to our Australian ears and Aboriginal ears in particular, trying to get that kids who are really enthused and who are obviously engaged in it, to have that acceptance from elders and community. Aboriginal community, because I know that early on there was this interesting but very early process of separating where it was from in its early stages, obviously in Brooklyn, and what it means for us and how we, I think it was there was an article that's talking about aboriginalizing hip hop, which I'm really excited to continue to talk about in this panel tonight in terms of. It just boggles my mind how hip-hop has made its own way to all parts of the world, and it's become so unique. For Aboriginal hip-hop, a lot of it was about trying to find ways to, come to terms with, accepting it, but also finding the strengths and how we can actually enhance Indigenous culture in terms of like the song lines and knowledge retention and all of that. And I think we are really starting to appreciate it and cherish it.
Exactly. Because it has been quite a journey, I think, for especially for us here in Australia. I'll pose the question to our American guests, to AD. If I could ask you the same question, obviously with your esteemed career within hip hop. I mean, your path would obviously have been quite different to what Dobby's has been in terms of, dealing with the two different cultures that he has within his own, familial, background. But what would you say, looking at where hip hop started to where it is today on a global scale, and from a cultural standpoint for yourself as an American, what would you think of some of the biggest challenges have been in its acceptance to obviously be the genre that it is today?
I think that probably one of the biggest challenges for me, which has kind of persisted through, I mean, I work right now at the University of Virginia as assistant professor of hip hop in the Global South.
Right. Wow.
And I'm in a music department. But part of the challenge of doing this work is that there's so few people who are doing that I'm having to explain 50 years of history before we can have a conversation about how I'm evaluated.
Right, yes.
And this 50 years of history that I have to try to consolidate into 5 minutes or into a portfolio before people evaluate my work means that there's going to have to be a whole lot that I'm bringing to the table that a whole lot of people are having to process before they can even be on the page to be able to try to evaluate what it is that I'm doing and how it might be a valuable offering to a conversation about how we think, how we engage, how we produce. And so it makes it challenging because if you live a life immersed in hip hop culture and then you're having to explain that to the people who are evaluating the work that you're doing, and these are the people whose endorsement you need in order to make your work seem valid in that place, then it's just going to be an incredibly daunting task to continue to want to get up and persist to do that work. But you hope that by the time someone else is in a position similar to mine, then there will not just be me, there'll be other people who are able to talk to their colleagues or, who will have published work that gives folks the opportunity to be able to not have to do all of that that work beforehand.
Absolutely. Have to agree with you on that. James, what are your thoughts on it too? Because obviously being from New York, obviously people tend to, I would guess, assume that you would, just sort of know every single thing that there is about hip hop, being that, it is, hip hop's birthplace. But at the same time, there's been a lot of challenges to have overcome to where we are today, to where people can sit and say they have flourishing careers within the hip hop realm. So how would you say it's that journey of having to overcome those challenges has been for you, and where you are right now?
I think the biggest challenge was interpersonal for me, particularly thinking about what my trajectory was when I was in my mid-20s and trying to convince my mother in particular, my family, my friends, and then most importantly myself, that this is more than just a hobby, but that it's a passion, and in fact being afforded some opportunities to take it beyond just the creation of content and being able to teach it and take it to those levels and then bring it into academia. I think that was a huge journey for me. And now that I'm on the other side of that, I think on a more macro level, what would be a challenge? I guess probably the biggest challenge that goes without saying, but we'll say it for the sake of conversation, is that hip hop is an American cultural form, and its roots are in many Black musical genres that preceded. But I always find it fascinating how media and those who will can shun all of its what are perceived as its negative qualities, and not take on the bigger picture understanding of the full value of the culture. And in fact, even those quote unquote negative qualities, that they are an extension of the history of America. And at this point, because hip hop is a universal language, we're now talking about a world history as far as those who have entry points from different places and spaces beyond the US and certainly New York when it started. So I think that's probably the biggest macro challenge, is trying to continue to convince people of its relevant powers, its ability to allow people to tell stories in a way that's far more advanced than most other music genres can do, or cultural forms can do.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you. And I have to reiterate, I think, having to break away from the stigma of it's just a hobby. And obviously for us, we've been doing this for quite some time. But I think for the younger generation and those who are, obviously that we're kicking the door open for, it's not just a hobby. It is so much bigger than that. It's just, there's the words escape to say how globally impactful having a career, if hip hop is your thing, having a career in hip hop can be. It far exceeds hobby, but I have to agree with James there. For a long time, it was always my side hustle as opposed to working, you know, a day job and then going, but hip hop's really what I want to do, because there just weren't enough avenues at the time. But when you look now, I mean, we've got all these incredible, professors and doctorates and that sort of thing. I think it's definitely something that hasn't even scratched the surface yet. Dr. James, next to me here, what are your thoughts? What do you think? Obviously, with your role right now, with what you're doing at the Sydney Conservatorium, what do you see a particular set of challenges that you've had to overcome to get to this particular point where hip hop is concerned?
I mean, pros and cons. There are some amazing there's some amazing academic being done, and that helps as much as I don't think hip hop needs legitimizing.
Yes,
it helps.
Thank you.
Do that. But I mean, all of the things that AD said, I've had those experiences myself. I've heard some of my own research students give papers, and some of the questions that come from colleagues, academics, just show that they don't really understand what this form of music is about. And you can't sort of say, well, the paper took 20 minutes, but now I'm going to give you a 5-hour overview of what, why melody is part of flow or how, because they just don't. So what I'm seeing, though, is a chasm which has a really good side and a really bad side. So the really good side is that there are progressive, brilliant, amazing people doing amazing work, both in the academy but also in schools with our young people who want to be making this music, and they are, forget legitimizing it. They're just doing brilliant, wonderful things, and I think that's the way to go. The problem is that we have to drag the rest of the world with us, and that's a real problem, because at the moment, if you're going to do music in school, and let's face it, so many parents think that their kids should be doctors or lawyers rather than musicians already, but then if you're going to be a musician, you should be in orchestra or you should be in bands. You shouldn't be doing this hip-hop thing, because that's for naughty people. I mean, it's complete rubbish, of course, but so there's a battle there that we have to actually fight, I think, anyway, with the next generation of music educators and the current generation of music educators, so that they can understand the many, many sophistications of hip-hop. And we know what they are now, because we've got beautiful academics going out and writing fantastic papers and texts. Yep.
Absolutely.
Education.
Z, what are your thoughts on that?
I think for myself, there have definitely been a couple of challenges. I think obviously growing up and listening to this music and finding a connection to hip-hop culture, it was hard to sort of explain that, or have people see that who don't sort of maybe experience the same sense of like being a misfit. And the thing I love about hip-hop is it's just like, come as you are.
Yes.
I think the other thing is definitely being a woman as well, and sort of navigating a space that is, I guess, kind of dominated by males, and sort of like trying to, when you get a compliment, it's like, wow, you're a good rapper for a girl. And so kind of having to prove yourself in that way. But also in terms of a career path, a lot of people have said, if you're going to go into this sort of like career path, there's not, I guess, like a lot of money to be made and things like that. But there's also, what I've learned is I feel like I live a really rich life. And when you're not driven by money and, working in community and things like that, like I feel rich. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is just throwing a question out here. Whoever wants to take a stab at it. Your 18-year-old self would have come. How old are you? Are you 18? You are, aren't you? You just got to make sure there's 12 young ones in. Your 18-year-old self had come up to you and say, look, I'm going to have a career in hip hop. What advice would you give me? What do you think you tell them with what you know now?
That's a mad question.
I'm throwing it out to everybody, but I'd like the most colourful answers. So, 18-year-old self, I want a career in hip hop, but what's the advice of how to get there? I want to be fulfilled, career-wise, monetarily, spiritually, all of those things that you get from having a well-balanced life. But I want the career in hip hop, and obviously coming from what Dr. Humberstone had mentioned about,
If I could have a stab at that, because it ties into what we were talking about before the panel. I was discouraged you know, pursuing hip hop because no one could see the value in it. And, you know, it's true, like there were no alleyways, you know, pathways to actually make money, or that people could see you could actually make a proper career of, where you could make a living out of it. I feel like if my 18-year-old self came up to me, I'd say just like, wait, you know, keep at it and wait for society to catch up. Yes. Because it is rising, and there is so much to value. And I think that, like, you know, there are emerging pathways in education, obviously, to be able to tell people that Dr. A.D. Carson wrote an entire album in the form of a hip-hop album blows people's minds, but it is true and it is possible, and that is just a different way of presenting information. You know, I teach history and Aboriginal culture through hip-hop, right. And so I'd say all of that to him and be like, you just got to keep at it. And
absolutely.
I think it's great. You know?
Absolutely. AD, what are your thoughts? What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Yes, so I feel really fortunate to have been to be the stubborn person that I have been for a really long time. And so when I was 18 and I was saying that I wanted to rap and that's what I'm going to do with my life, and folks had questions or concerns about it, when they didn't ride with me, then I just kept going. You know, like I had it set in my mind that this journey was going to a particular destination. I didn't know it. And even all the way up to the moment that I defended my dissertation and was on the job market, the job that I currently have, I didn't know existed. And it was something that was new, and those things converged. And so for some folks, it may seem serendipitous, but I just believe that the world was going to, I mean, there are all kinds of jobs out in the world.
Right.
And having the skill set that you develop making music, being a part of this culture, you'll be able to be effective at a whole lot of jobs.
Right.
So then when this one came and it seemed to be asking for all of the things that I was already doing and that like the skill set that I've been developing for my entire life, it was like, okay, well, this is go time.
Yes, absolutely.
So I don't know that I don't know if I would tell 18-year-old me do something different. I'd say, you know, keep with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. James, what about your thoughts? What would you tell your 18-year-old self? Advice.
I probably ask myself a question that would be left for an open answer, which is, what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
And I realized probably 10 years after my 18-year-old self that it was something I was truly passionate about. And not only that I was passionate about, but it's a true privilege to say that you're passionate about anything, because there's a lot of people who just not like serve through life, and they go through this, what I like to call a traditional trajectory. You know, you go to school up to a certain point, you might continue on in college and then get a job and family and or you might, you know, not go to college but then start a job and, you know, whatever. But
exactly.
Those of us who are fortunate enough to say that we're passionate about something in and of itself is something that, you know, feel fortunate about. And so I would just ask myself, is this something you're passionate about? And that's probably, you know, I wish I would have come to that great epiphany when I was 18, because I would have pursued it at moments where I was questioning myself and people were questioning me, in a similar capacity as Brother AD did. Yeah. Like, I didn't have that stubborn mindset. I was questioning myself way too much, and I don't have any regrets. But certainly, that's kind of where I'd be asking what I'd be, you know, discussing with my 18-year-old self.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. See, just quickly, what do you think you would tell yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think, like, I can so relate to what James said. There was a lot of fear associated with me thinking about music as a career. So I went on and studied environmental science at university for 5 years, which I don't regret at all. So I started quite late. But if I were to talk to my 18-year-old self, I would say, do the thing that scares you.
I like that. That's awesome. That's a good one. Dr. Humberstone, what would your advice be?
I I mean, I have such a different path, and I've ended up in a very weird place, orchestrating hip hop songs. Go figure, for orchestra and choir. But I mean,
That's amazing.
So
You've
I'm
ended up where you should
yeah,
be.
look, I wouldn't. I mean, apart from trying to be open-minded and trying to challenge yourself, but just to do a very quick ad. One thing that I did last year that I'm super proud of, that has nothing to do with this idea of becoming a hip hop artist, but is that I wrote a new degree that we have at the Sydney Con, and this is not doing an advert for a bunch of academics all over the world, but it's a degree where you can follow the kind of pathway to do what these amazing people around me do, who are the proper real thing as far as hip hop artists go. And we have a Bachelor of Music Education, in which you can become a qualified music teacher, but your major can be contemporary. So we can now, for the first time ever, actually accept rappers, we can accept producers, we can accept MCs as majors to become music teachers and train them from the age of 18. So I'm super proud that we've managed that.
Wow, that is amazing. So to anybody that's watching and that you were hoping for that question, there you go, there's your answer. Now, we're obviously really sort of speeding up on time, so I do believe we're going to have a question and answer little section with our audience. But before that does happen, I just want to squeeze through one more conversation point, and we can start taking some people's questions before we have to round up. Hip-hop, diversity, inclusion, and unification will fall under the same umbrella of unity. However, hip-hop as a genre and culture has often fallen prey to the ugliness of misappropriation, lack of representation, and abuse of power at times. How do we as a global community ensure that the latter mentioned issues are handled effectively by our educators today and organisations that wish to use hip-hop as a teaching tool so that it is done correctly? Who would like to take a stab at that one? Any takers? The silence is deafening. Any takers?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Hip-hop, diversity, inclusion and unification fall under the same umbrella of unity. However, hip-hop as a genre and culture has often fallen prey to the ugliness of misappropriation, lack of representation and abuse of power. How do we as a global community ensure that the latter mentioned issues are handled effectively by our educators and organisations today that wish to use hip-hop as a teaching tool so that it's done correctly, so positively curate,
so how do we how can we use hip-hop
utilize it
to prevent
absolutely
these issues from happening?
Broad question, but I think it
no,
can be
it's a great question. I'll because I'd love to hear from everyone else, and so I'll speak very quickly. I when I hear you say that, I think about how hip hop is starting to really become. It's on the rise in Australia, for context, and people are starting to really pay attention to hip hop as a means of education, as activism, and as cultural education from my perspective. I want to just keep an observant eye for any means of which it's starting to sort of turn astray, because there is sexism in our hip hop communities, especially because it is a male dominated community.
Yes.
So I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I'll leave it at that, and then I might have more.
Did you want to have a stab at that?
So I have a lecture that I give every year called "Should I Teach Rick Ross?" And the point is not like what's inappropriate and what shouldn't we teach. The point is about self-censorship. The point is about musical culture, and I think any teacher and any practitioner who isn't thinking about that isn't doing the best job they can do. Yeah. And so really what I want to do is just challenge people to actually think and think deeply about, there's so much good stuff out there, and we don't have to, it's like, what should we say? like music teachers did back in the 1950s. We shouldn't have rock and roll in classrooms because it's all going to, you know, lead them away from Jesus. Or we shouldn't teach jazz back in the 1920s, as Dobby and I were talking about before, you know. Some of those articles that people were writing about, you know, bad people's jazz music in 1920s. A friend of mine was saying the other day, you know, replace the word jazz with hip hop. It's the same problem now. So don't demonize. Just go find the really amazing stuff and teach that.
Don't demonize. I like that. AD, James, would you like to have a stab at answering that?
I think that we just need practitioners on all levels. We need more doctors like Dr. James, Dr. AD, in the academic spaces who are, you know, really breaking the door open for folks like myself who are looking at continuing, you know, in the academic capacity, while at the same time just continuing to create music and trying to kind of like merge the two worlds. And then you need folks that are like not necessarily looking at academia, those like those non-traditional teachers who still bring something to the discussion.
Yeah.
You know, I think about almost like the metaphor of any political structure that people don't agree with. You have to attack it from all sides. You have your, you know, elected officials who have a job that they need to be held accountable to complete in a way that serves the people. And then you have the people who have to do the job of holding said elected officials accountable and speaking up about what they need. And I think it's the same thing when you think about hip hop as a tool for teaching and learning. It's we can't lay the burden on just any one group of people to, you know, expand it in its positive capacities.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely, absolutely. All right, we've got a few questions here from some of our viewers. This is a question from Sarah Williams. I'm interested in the power of hip hop and using it to express your political voice in emancipatory politics. My example would be the Black Lives Matter and using hip hop and arts to teach about racial relations. So that's her question. She's interested in the power of hip-hop and using it to express your political voice. So example would be the Black Lives Matter movement and using hip-hop and the arts to teach about racial relations. Your thoughts on that, Dobby, obviously with the Indigenous side of
Yeah. It's funny, I just released a song with Sister Barker, who's a Barkindji woman from Wilcannia, based in Mount Druitt. And, you know, we use hip-hop to be able to speak activism, and obviously hip-hop is just really born in that foundation so strongly, you know, as resistance music. And I can't think of any music, I'll say it right here, I can't think of a form of music that is more direct and more, like, so overtly political than hip-hop. And it's so great. You know, you think of all the protest songs that definitely are in line with the Black Lives Movement. Both in the States and also here, we have a lot of artists, especially Aboriginal artists, who use hip-hop, you know, to speak on January 26th, like Kobe D and AB Original. You've got Barker. You've got even Birds and Jimbla, who also have songs called Black Lives Matter. The amount of songs that actually have the words Black Lives Matter in their Black Lives Matter songs, just, you know, it speaks, you know, to that power of hip-hop as activism and protest.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We have another question here by Deanna. Sorry, AD, did you want to add something to that, please?
Well, yeah, I think that what I wanted to say, and it also, I believe, relates to the previous question about appropriation. And I think that part of the conversation, or at least in having the conversation, being mindful of the idea of products and producers as opposed to simply products. Hip hop as like a vehicle that has contents inside. And the thing that we call appropriation, I think, is more associated with a product focused outlook, where we're thinking about the thing that gets produced and thinking about hip hop culture, thinking about hip hop cultural products as a means by which we sell and market things, even ourselves. And so when we think about something like Black Lives Matter, we're thinking about engaging with a moment. We're thinking about you know, like what folks call activism, talking about raising awareness of particular issues. And it may be really difficult to separate what we might otherwise consider marketing and promotion and selling and bringing awareness from something like that. But I think that within the larger cultural picture, we're also having to connect that to a history. And in that history is not like about selling a particular thing or selling a particular set of things. And if we don't look at that comprehensively, then what ends up happening is a person says, if I wrap myself in this hip hop package, then I'm able to market myself in this particular way.
Right.
And I think that if we're mindful then of the history in the goals that we are attempting to accomplish whenever we are utilizing hip hop cultural practices, then it probably keeps us mindful of the thing that people would and often do rightly call appropriation whenever it happens.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, AD. So we've got about 10 minutes or so to go. Under the pump. Next question. We've got one here. Thank you for bringing up male domination. So we'll bring Ziadala in for that one. What are we going to do about this? This is a question from Claire. Not sure if you have the template answer for that one, but have a crack.
You know, I think it's about encouragement as well. Like, I know for myself, I was really shy and I wasn't, you know, that person who would, you know, take the mic. But I've seen women do that. And it was really empowering for me to see. But I feel like in spaces where that doesn't happen, like, I feel like we need to make space as well.
Right.
I remember playing a show and just seeing, I guess, or hear songs that were quite misogynistic, and I just addressed the male audience and said, don't you want like women at your shows? Like if you're saying this stuff, like women are not going to turn up, but like, don't you want women to be there? Like you got to stop this, man.
Right. Feel you.
Demographic.
That's exactly right, and an important one at that too. Absolutely. All right, a couple more questions. This is a question by Kun, I think is the name. I hope I'm saying it right. It's a probably statement type question. Hip hop is a genre, music by culture or by creativity? I don't know if that question's written right. Hip hop is a genre, music by culture or by creativity?
Both.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the amalgamation of those two that creates the culture.
Right.
Right? Like you look at the four elements and then the fifth element I have always heard is knowledge, that kind of, you know, because none of those elements you know, they fall without the knowledge, and then it's the creativity that's kind of the glue that sort of holds it together. I don't know, that's my take, but...
James, Dr. Humberstone, your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's just a really, really exciting time to be a musicologist in this area because it's one of those really nice places where the research is informing the practice and the practice is informing the research in really tight circles, and people are just writing. I mean, I can remember when I had my first student writing a thesis about this, that we lost about 2 months trying to define the word flow.
Yes.
You know, luckily a lot of people have been out there and done some nice work in that sense. So it's all of those things.
Right. James, in New York, hip hop is a genre? Is a genre music by culture or by creativity for you? Your thoughts?
Before I answer, I'd like to defer to Brother AD because I see he has a response prepared.
Yeah. AD.
Well, I think that
the two of you bouncing off.
I think that that I have a problem with genres, not because I don't think that it's not because I don't believe it's aptly descriptive. I think that what it is describing is like ways things get sold, and the bodies that are described by the thing that is meant to be sold. And so I would probably push back on the question and then say that, like, I approach hip hop knowledge production as like kind of a set of practices more than a like sort of a creative product, a particular creative product, or, you know, like to like stay within like the confines of what we call genre. Because if we think about artists like Lauryn Hill, or we think more recently about someone like Tyler, the Creator, or Anderson .Paak, then we get into these practices that we might call or like might associate with hip hop, but then those music sound very different and they're fairly diverse.
Yes.
Also, I don't know. I don't want to be like I don't want to like hog anything, but I do think that it's also really important for like guys to talk about what we might do about this, like what we talk about male domination, or we talk about misogyny, particularly like all of the kind of vile things that go on, and some of that is about us stepping up in spaces and not just saying when these things happen that they shouldn't be going on, but also being more responsible about the histories that we tell. We must remember that the first hip hop mogul is a woman, and we also must tell more accurate and comprehensive histories so that we don't write women out of the narratives where they were present and then continue to perpetuate a myth that women haven't been participating at the highest levels for the entire history of the thing that we are currently engaged in.
I don't think we can go on any further. That's the mic drop right there. Thank you, thank you, Dr. Adi. Well, we've come to the end of our conversation already. It's not fair. Not fair, but really appreciated. And it's been such an honour to have facilitated this conversation with you incredible humans. I want to thank James and AD up early live streaming. Oh, I believe we've got one more question. Oh, here we go. Hang on one second. Maybe we can. We do have something. We do have something really quick. Let's see. I don't know how quick we're going to answer this one. Here we go. All right, let's go for it. Question saved by Lolita. Thank you, Lolita. And this is the last one. Considering the hierarchies of power that exist in Western music schools, what does or would hip-hop education look like in music academies and conservatories? Could it be transformative, or would hip-hop scholars and educators struggle to assert the value of hip-hop? That's deep.
Well,
clearly.
I think there's
proving that it's making its way through spaces. I had an opportunity to present at Harvard digitally a few months ago for their 4th annual Hip Hop X conference. And so we know hip hop is making its way into academic spaces. This has been happening since the mid-90s. It's just starting to kind of penetrate more academic spaces. And so it'll continue to do so. It's happening. I know it to be true from personal experience and from watching other peers and those who are, who've been doing it for even longer than I have. So,
right. Awesome.
Yeah, I think also but the care that we have to take is to make sure that, like the things that have happened, because, folks say, history don't repeat, but it rhymes, what ultimately we have to resist is the appropriation of hip hop itself by academic institutions, and then the kind of gatekeeping that goes on there, so that access to the institutions looks precisely the way that it looks now. Right. And then people don't have the opportunity to do it because it's happening at these academies. And this is how you find the career path. And if it can't happen in other places, very much like previous musical forms have gone, then we find ourselves repeating this pattern and then making it inaccessible. And so it's not the revolutionary thing, or it's not the way that we like reconfigure our institutions. It's a way that the institution has perpetuated itself, and that kind of power dynamic just exists in a different form, with a new set of products and people.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Humpstone, would you like to?
AD just said what I wanted to say, but way better. So, I mean, the only thing that I would add in there is that I think that this has been true not just of hip-hop, it's been true with other new musical genres. So there is at least a path that can be trodden there, but it's a problematic path. I mean, that is a brilliant point. And we see the same in schools, Some of the really successful projects in schools are kind of almost not self-destructive, but there's a problem because you're successfully getting kids to write rhymes and to perform and creating recording booths, and that's fantastic when that flourishes in a school environment, and it gets to that whole issue of looking at hip hop as legitimate music in a school. But at the same time, there's something about this wonderful genre which is about, F you, the institutions, and I'm doing this at my home, and I'm telling my story my way. And actually, we can't lose that. So, but I'm actually totally comfortable with that tension, and I want that tension. in there.
It keeps it honest as well, I think. It does. It keeps it honest. Okay, well, I do believe that is it, though. What a great way to end. Thank you both to AD and James for streaming in from the US. I know your morning is just beginning. So thank you so much for your time and for being here. And, of course, thank you to our incredible guests here in the studio, Zia Dalla, Dr. James Humberstone, and, of course, Dobby. And, of course, thank you to 4E Sydney Riverside Theatre for its a wonderful space. And, of course, to our discussion partnerships with Community Music Activities Conference and the International Society for Music Education. And, of course, last but not least, to the brilliant audience that have been tuning in via Facebook Live. We certainly hope that you have enjoyed this engaging conversation and has taken something with you to hopefully encourage you on your hip-hop way. So stay safe and stay well, everybody out there, and thank you again for tuning in.
Peace to y'all.
Oh,
hey,
we were just
thank
saying,
you so much, man.
You guys were so sharp for horrible o'clock in the morning. You blew me away. Thank you.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Is it frozen?
Yeah, maybe he froze.
Maybe he turned it off.